My new book is now available for purchase at your preferred online bookseller, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and others. We Chose Play, Raising an Autistic Child to Thrive and Feel Understood, chronicles my floor-time journey with my son. I outline my understanding of the early functional, emotional, developmental capacities and describe how the autistic experience of each varies with examples. I guide parents through implementing their own floor-time approach at home, with or without expensive therapies and services, and talk about the process of personal growth one experiences along the journey. I hope you'll check it out and let me know your thoughts about it. Learn more at affectautism.com/wechoseplay, all one word. Affect Autism, in its 10th year of providing free, supportive content for your DIR journey.
All of Affect Autism's podcasts are produced and edited by Daria Brown. Please note that the views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved, do not constitute educational or medical advice, and do not necessarily reflect the views of Affect Autism, Daria Brown, nor ICDL and associated parties. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with their individual circumstances for specific support.
You're listening to DIR Dialogues, a podcast from Affect Autism, where a panel of practitioners discuss topics related to the developmental, individual differences, relationship-based, or DIR model and its practice.
Welcome back, Floortimers. I'm so excited to bring the third edition of DIR Dialogues, where we talk about issues around the developmental, individual differences, relationship-based model. And today I have 5 panelists, starting with Nagwa Kader. She is an early intervention specialist in Cairo, Egypt. She's been practicing DIR Floortime since 2014 and opened up a Floortime center there called Etvasel, which means connect in English. She just hosted a fabulous DIR Floortime conference in Cairo with over 100 attendees. Welcome, Nagwa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Daria.
And occupational therapist Carrie Siskowski is a DIR Floortime Expert Training Leader in Central New Jersey who does in-home support through her service Therapy Keeper for families who are typically raising autistic kids. Welcome back, Carrie. And a many-time guest, but not in about a year or so, clinical psychologist Ira Glavinsky is joining us again from Michigan, where he engages in numerous related endeavors using a developmental individual differences relationship-based framework. Welcome back, Ira.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Many-time guest of Affect Autism and We Chose Play podcast, but not for a long time. Welcome back to clinical psychologist Kathy Platzman of Floortime Atlanta, who is a DIR Floortime Expert Training Leader who also trains up-and-coming training leaders. Nice to have you back, Kathy.
Thanks, Daria. Good to be here.
And last but not least, the star of our podcast, because he is the reason why we're doing this podcast. DIR Floortime Expert Training Leader Riccardo Azze is a neuro and psychomotor therapist and recreational therapist in Florence, Italy, Firenze, who specializes in home-based services. He recently wrote a newsflash for ICDL entitled Becoming a DIR Floortime Therapist. And that's what we're discussing today. And that's why I wore my DIR shirt that was designed by Stephanie Peters, an occupational therapist in New Jersey, for a DIR conference we had at ICL a few years ago. It is Keep Calm and Co-Regulate On. So, you know, when do I have an excuse to wear this, right? So thank you all for being here. We're going to start out by, and in the blog post for today, I will link to the newsflash so people can read it, but we are going to refer to it. And it's basically about when you start doing floor time, you're kind of thinking of all these floor time principles and techniques, and you're doing those, but eventually you transform into this floor time mindset where you just become a floor time practitioner. So I just want to go around it and ask, briefly, what did Riccardo's newsflash bring up for you right off the bat when you read it, Nagwa?
I think it's the journey of becoming a floor-time practitioner. It's the mindset, the shift in the mindset. It's a philosophy. It's not just something that you do in a therapy room and that's it. And as we go, you still learn and learn and learn, and you develop personally and professionally. So I think it's not just something that we do and we get it done and that's it. It's a process, it's a journey, and I loved it, yeah.
Thank you. Carrie?
For me, what jumped out and I was reflecting on was when the article said, are you a therapist who does DIR floor time or you are a DIR floor time therapist? And for like as long as I can remember, I'm like, I'm a DIR floor time therapist. And like I like was digging a little deeper and I'm like, I feel like in the beginning, like beginning, I was an occupational therapist who did like this splash of DIR floor time. But it actually took me like reading and reflecting that to remember that because it's so deep now because I've been doing it for a decade. So it's so deep now. So that was like interesting to kind of go back. And often people, like parents, will say, well, do you do OT or you do floor time? And they really look at it as two separate things. And I think I honor that because their experience of what they see and maybe in the way that I do a session is very different than a traditional OT. But I'm like, it's a package deal, right? Like I just see it as I'm an occupational therapist and a floor time therapist all in one. So that was my reflection that I had for sure.
What about you, Ira?
Daria, it reminds me of very, very, very early development where what we do when we first are on the planet is we learn associatively by observing and taking in different things in the world. And then we develop concepts, and then the concepts have meaning, and then we broaden out. And the world that we see is very different and has meaning from the concepts, very different from that initial associative implicit learning.
I love it. I wouldn't have expected an answer different from Dr. Levinsky. And Kathy.
I think for me, that journey from learning the strategies to living the floor time life, and what Carrie said, it's kind of impossible to separate them out. That journey is a very long journey. It's a journey for therapists, but it's also a journey for parents. And what it made me reflect on was how much we enjoy what I call DIR breakthrough moments for families where they realize it's not just let's go play and work on X. It's we live this day in relationship with each other. And sometimes that tipping point can be dramatic. You can have something happen and see it and you go like, oh my, but also it can be just what Ira said, where you begin by applying a strategy and then it turns into a concept and then it turns into a way of life. I wish I could make a documentary of watching parents with that breakthrough moment or what was the tipping point for them, as well as for therapists, but that's where it made me go.
Well, your wish may come true because they are experiencing that all the time at the DIR intensives at ICDL's Institute.
Right.
And I have one podcast now, another one coming about parents going through that breakthrough. And it really is incredible. It really is incredible. And some people don't have those breakthrough moments. I would say that I was one of the parents who didn't necessarily have a breakthrough moment. It was a very gradual learning process as I did the podcast and everything, and more insights coming. And then, like Carrie said, reflecting back, like, oh, yeah, I used to do this and I forgot all about that because I'm just so different now. So, yeah, very interesting. And Ricardo, I mean, it's not really what insight did you have when you read it because you're the one that wrote this. What made you write the newsflash?
That's a good question, and that was the thought that I was going around, or listening to all of you, and that was so great because every point of view, every perspective had something in common with the reason why I wanted to share this newsletter. And I have been asked implicitly by the students how I became a floor timer, implicitly because I remember that day that all the class in a course, they were like sharing worries about how they could put their professional goals inside the floor time session. And they were describing my own struggle when I was a little bit younger years ago. and I started to do the floor time, to be a floor timer. And that was the moment when I turned myself back and I saw my journey and I could describe what happened. And this is why I wrote the newsletter, because I realized the moment when I changed my way to do floor time. And it was, and I say that in the newsletter, in a particular moment when I had that, it was a problem for me. It was a challenge for me. Okay, how do I put floor time in my profession, or how do I put my professional goal into the session? It was a challenge. So I did mentor for the first time. And mentoring opened a door to a universe for me where I found my first strategy that was, okay, focus on one or two or three cases when you can, or you, it's me, free yourself, Ricardo, from the professional goals and just be there without thinking about what you have to do, what are your goals, how can you explain other professionals or parents or the team or the neuropsychiatric or the neurologist, or just focus on the moment with the child and choose a case where you can freely do that. And this is what I did. And that gave me the opportunity to leave the shift, not to think about the shift or not to project the shift, but just to leave it. And I saw, and please stop me whenever you want, and I saw that the neuropsychomotor therapist came in the room smoothly on the background, technically recognizing and watching to the skill, but very, very respectful of the relationship. So I loved Carrie did this as a movement, like crossing fingers. It was kind of integrating the two parts of our professionalism. For me, it was a kind of background and foreground. I was a floor timer in the foreground, leaving the neuropsychomotor therapist in the background, if it makes sense.
I love that. Yeah. And I think it really describes a lot of different challenges that people have and sometimes don't know that they have until something comes up. Carrie.
So I'm curious, because I know that you said that you work for yourself, right, in home base, because I will say on my journey, I've now owned my own business the last 5 years. Kathy, I know you've had your business for a long time. I'm not sure exactly everyone's story, but for me, the freeing moment was really going out on my own, right? So it's like I have to play some insurance games and stuff, but I was like, that was like to have that autonomy and to practice just the way that felt in such alignment for me. So I think people that are listening to this, I think depending upon who they're working for or whether they're working for themselves, I think that that's an added layer of the process. So I was just curious if you felt like that you got more, if that became more fluid or more clear, maybe would be a better word, when you started practicing on your own, because I know that was part of my journey.
In some ways, it's linked because I choose to do my own practice and my own service after that.
Mm-hmm.
When I felt like I was strong enough to do that without a big structure, but I still need teams. As I think you share this and you agree with this, that I need teams. I'm not alone, but I don't feel, and I don't want to be alone in working with supporting families and But yes, being in my own service is part of the process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did I answer you, Carrie?
Yeah, I just think that that's a common struggle. I'm coming off of, I did a big play conference and I did some Q&As with people that were really interested in floor time. And a common theme of people that were trying to step into that was the infrastructure of where they worked, and sort of like them feeling like I want to do more of this, but this is what they're saying, and having that like internal struggle. So I think people that are listening to that, I think that they would probably benefit from hearing, as we talk about our journey, how the structure of where you work and influence like that friction or that ease. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I can add something, I take the advantage of this something that I want to add to thank everybody that I met in this journey, because they are the main reason why I could write that newsletter. They were my training leaders, my colleagues, my mentors, all of them that helped me and supported me with my reflections. So why do I say this now? Because I did that in the previous service when I wasn't alone with my own, the shift. And it happened after one of my mentors said, all of us, we have to do homeworks. And sometimes homeworks are filling papers, but your job is not filling papers. That's an homework. But if you are sure about what you're doing and you can translate what you're doing in the language of that paper, then you can do that. But they're not the same thing. And it helped me a lot to be free into that relationship moment in the room, to differentiate the two moments.
I can think of podcasts I've done with Ira where he talked about going into schools and the mindset in the classroom and how hard it is to shift when you're part of a system. And I know when I reflect on my parent journey, I wasn't doing paperwork, but I was writing blog posts and doing podcasts and writing them up. And so that process really, I don't remember necessarily a light bulb moment, but a light bulb moment for me was realizing that it wasn't necessarily about doing 8 20-minute floor time sessions a day with my son. It was more about the mindset of being a floor time parent in every interaction I have with my son. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And any other thoughts about how you moved from having this idea of the goals of your profession to moving less from being concerned about a product and more to a process, and how you foster this in the professionals you train or mentor, and how it supported your own process training others? Because I know doing the podcast supported my own process, because I became the parent advocate, started facilitating and thinking, who am I to be facilitating a group with other parents? And I was sort of nudged into it with Jeff and Jeff Gunzel, CEO of ICDL, and Gil Tippy, who was the consultant or whatever, and really encouraged me to do this. And I realized when I'm speaking to parents about my journey, just realizing I can support these parents definitely in sharing that and in writing about it. Yeah, Kathy?
So this is reminding me, and Ricardo will probably remember this, I usually challenge students in my class who are wanting to be training leaders to go back and recollect how hard it was to embrace the model, even just the strategies, not the mindset, but how did you start? What reminded you of what your job was? And my own personal one was that when I forgot what I was doing, when I became befuddled, when I was thinking, this can't be floor time, I would remember one word, and I used to write it on a sticky note, and I'd put it in my office where only I could see it, and the word was affect. Because what I would do when I got confused is I'd get very blank, I'd get my face would turn into a stiff thing, my voice would be even, and I would begin my behavioral strategies. I would think, and I would go like, this is not filled with affect. So I could very dramatically pop it up with affect. But then after that, I very quietly started with affect, and I very quietly thought of what the other person was doing. And for me, that was not a breakthrough moment at all. That was a desperation moment of, am I even doing anything close to floor time right now? And as time went on, that just evened out into concepts.
Before you jump in, Ira, Kathy, you said at ICDL's conference last year, the DIR Floortime conference, you said something about every time you come to these conferences, you hear the same types of themes, but you're a different person every time you come to the conference and you're always learning something. Just having this community where you are all joined together. And, you know, I had a lot of floor time coaching from different people, but my first real floor time mentor, as you know, not a practitioner because I'm not a clinician or a practitioner, but as a parent coach, let's say, even though I don't really do parent coaching either, was Jackie Bartell, because we had a person who was watching my early Affect Autism videos wanting me to train their little school that they were starting in a state not far from here. And I emailed Jeff and I said, I'm not a training leader. And but this guy really, really wants me. And he said, I'll pair you up with Jackie. She's perfect for it. And she sort of threw me out there and said, you can do this. And, you know, it really gave me confidence to be able to reflect and do all of the things that you do. And so it's wonderful to have this community of others. Ira, go ahead.
Well, this reminds me of, there was a book that was written by a European writer, and it had something to do with discovering the self or self-insight, something. And I had thought that the book was about infants developing a sense of self and the process. When I got the book, it was totally different. It was about all of us discovering ourselves and becoming an I. And the question in the book was, do you remember the first moment where you said, hey, I'm an I, and nobody can tell me what to do, how to do it. I can find that by myself. I have a body and I live in my body. I am myself. And I can do things without having to ask for permission. That entered into my supervision because I was really confused. I would see a child on Monday and I wouldn't have supervision until Thursday. And I probably saw 5 or 6 other kids on that Monday also. So what was going on with me with that initial child? Part of it was lost, part of it was distorted, part of it I just didn't remember. And I had to bring in to my supervision on Thursday this problem that I had had with this child. And I would walk into my supervisor and I would begin to tell a distorted story, almost a fairy tale, because I had forgotten a lot of what was going on. And this person would take in the information through his or her ears and would be distorting the story based on their biases. So this kid who I was talking about was becoming a fictitious kid, an unreal kid based on how I saw him and how the supervisor was listening to me talk about it. And then the supervisor would tell me what to do and how to handle the situation. And I would run into difficulty almost 100% of the time because my supervisor could do it in his or her way, but they weren't me and I wasn't them. So what I had to do was I had to go into my sessions and really fly by the seat of my pants. And what I began to think about, and I think it fits very well with what we're talking about today, was that there really wasn't a method, or we think we follow methods of how to do things. But what we're really doing is we're treating children and parents. We're not thinking about methods and strategies. And what I think is a lot of that has to do with who we are and our implicit selves, our nonverbal selves. Daria, you use the word mindset, and as soon as I hear the word mind, what I begin to think about is no, no, no. It's not mind that we're working with, it's whole people. We work holistically, we work with brains and total bodies. And what I'm going to do with this child in front of me is I'm going to use me and everything about me. And if I go by that principle, then what's in my office in the moment is a relationship. It's a me or I, and it's another person, a you. And I think that opened me up to feeling like we can't work with a specific method on a specific part of the body. What we need to do is treat a whole system. We're working with the child in front of us, we're working with the parents, we're working with the environment. And what I felt was it exploded from thinking about a tiny morsel of a particular treatment tool to total work. And I think that DIR, that the model is really what it feels like. It feels like a totality. It's the development, it's the individual differences, but it's the relationship between us. And it came from those experiences.
I'm actually thinking, as Dr. Ira just said, like when he mentioned it's the I, it's we in the session are completely different people when we tell someone else our story, and how they reflect on it is not actually what is happening, or not usually the same, or not necessarily the same. And I'm thinking that sometimes I'd be sitting in a therapy session, like in a session with a child, and I'd be thinking, am I doing floor time? Is this it? Am I getting somewhere? Do we see any progress happening? Or I'm just sitting there, and I usually reflect on, okay, let's go back to the first session I've met him, and how the relationship changed and how I changed. Because I believe that with every child, I become a different person. Sometimes I get into a room with a child, and then I get into the other room with another child, and I'd be a totally different person. And I think it's the affect that Kathy was just mentioning, and the I of how my I sometimes changes when I am with someone else who needs a different relationship. And we see that with parents as well. Like, this is floor time. You just have to pace yourself. Don't jump into right away. Don't try to change everything at once. It will happen. It's the process of just building a different frame of thinking. And it takes time. I think it takes time.
It reminds me two things. One of the best video I've been shared in a class was a video when the therapist, the student, started saying that was a bad video. I was so tired. At the end of the day, I didn't do anything. But the authenticity that all we could see in that video was the key. You don't have to be a clown, with all respect for the clown. You don't have to be up every moment, or you just have to be yourself and be driven by the relationship. So you can, and it's a very learning moment for parents when they cannot be, they have to work, we, all of us, we have a lot of stuff to do. So maybe their floor time moment can be when they're very relaxed or tired at the end of the day, when they can just allow this and say, oh, I'm so tired, come here, and have some just moment together. And that's a floor time moment.
I was thinking, Ira, when you said like holistic, that took me a while to get there. That took me a long while. And I used to identify as someone who wasn't good staying in my lane, right? So like I was the OT, but then like I did the language and I did the psychology aspect. And I always felt when I was younger, like I could get in trouble, like all the time, right? And I remember being in like a beautiful reflective moment and saying just this. And the person reflected back to me. He said, is it possible that instead of saying you don't do a good job staying in your lane, that over time your lane has just gotten wider?
Wider, yeah.
And I remember being like, feeling like that just gave me so much permission. And it was sort of around that time that I was like, the lane got wide because I was separating it off of like very clinical things, like OT things and speech things and psychology things. And when I gave myself permission just to widen that lane, it was like, this is the lane of relationships. And here's everything that drives on this road. But it did take me a while to not feel like I was getting in trouble. And I respectfully, I think that that's my own individual difference. I always was really curious. Like I never pretended like I knew as much as my speechies, but OTs would be like, we do swings and we do this, you know, like in my early career. And I'm like, it just never made sense to me. And what lifted me into that was, which we've also echoed all of us at some point in our sentiments today, is community. So that hands down, like where I am today is the DIR Floortime, Ricardo, just like you were saying. It was the community of really seasoned professionals that scooped me up and was like eager to, and then just really brought me to where I am.
And I mean, a number of times Colette Ryan says, I'm not an OT, but I play one on TV.
Yes.
Just from working with OTs all the time.
The second thing that was that is linked with your second question, Daria, how we support and how we mentor this process. And this is a trick, in positive way question that I ask that is not from my luggage. I took it from one of my mentors. And the question is, where and when did you have fun in that particular session? And this question opens to something different that is not, how did you reach praxis? How did you get more language? When did you make the child or the parent solve a problem? It's about when did you have fun, or that again, it doesn't mean when did you have fun in this way, but when did you felt that you were into the relationship? Yes, and thank you, Carrie, for reminding me this point, that I think that was very important for me as well as a therapist.
Nagwa.
I was just going to echo Carrie when she said when she moved into like private practice and things started actually to fall in place. And I think this is very similar to what happened to me, and to holistically see the child, because I was told before that I need to stay in my domain. Like, yes, why are you observing sensory? Like, why are you trying to take the child into the sensory room? Like, you should be sitting in the other room and just doing tabletop activities. So just embracing the holistic view, I think it came when I started to develop more, when I had the fluidity and like I had space to actually, okay, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna do this, we need to observe everything. We need to include everything in what we're doing. It's not just a skill by skill, or just I do this and someone else is focusing on speech. We have to all work together. So I think this came to me more when I had the free, like when I can do it freely, when I can actually, yes, I want to do it. I have a voice and this should be done. And just another point that came to me when Ricardo is speaking now is when I'm actually inside of the session and I start laughing with the child, like mutual purposeful laugh comes out. I think this is where development really happens, because we're both really connected. Like the relationship is really happening now. So we're both mutually enjoying the moment. It's not just me sitting back and the child's doing something and I'm pretending to enjoy, or yeah, go ahead.
Stanley Greenspan wrote why DIR is a transdisciplinary model. It's not multidisciplinary, it's not interdisciplinary. The unique part of a transdisciplinary approach is that regardless of the therapist's specific discipline, we share a language, we share goals, and therefore we can talk to each other in a much more meaningful way. So for me, as a clinician in Atlanta, where we did a lot of case conferences and a lot of getting our little community together, it still is a thrill for me. I mean, a genuine thrill that I can talk to somebody across the globe and have that feeling of we're talking about exactly the same thing. It's just thrilling. So with that on top of all these other wonderful things we're talking about, our world is not a small world, even if we are in private practice. I have the gift of a lot of local colleagues, but equally to that gift is the ICTL community, which mirrors that. Like, we all know what we're talking about, and just that we share that language and we share our goals, even from different disciplines, I can't get another word other than thrilling. It's the thrill of connection.
And in case listeners don't know what ICDL means, she's talking about ICDL, International Council on Development and Learning.
What I was thinking about, Ricardo, in response to what you said about fun. And what I think about is it's all fun. And people who come into the field don't really recognize that. I have a lot of people, well, they'll talk to me about, I just did this with this child, and boy, did it work, and I felt really good. And then something happened, and we were into a struggle together, and that was not really good. And what I try to explain is I'm working with a child at the dollhouse, for example, and we're playing the dollhouse game, and it's just really collaborative and relationship. And then I tell the child, we're going to have to stop now. You're going to have to put your jacket on. We'll go out into the waiting room and get mom. And the child says, I'm not going. And somebody would say, oh, no, we're into a problem. And what I say is, we were just playing the dollhouse game, and now we're playing the I'm not going game. And one isn't good and one isn't bad. They're different games. And I think when we do the DIR kind of work, we're involved. Again, I'll use the word holistically. It doesn't matter if it's supposedly good or bad. It's we're in a relationship together, and we'll work this out together.
Ira, my son, plays the we're not going game at the end of every OT session. Ricardo?
I love this, Ira, and I would like to share with you once I was entering a session where the child and the mother, they were playing together, and it was my time. I arrived at their place, and I knock, and I entered the room, and the child, she came to me and pushed me away outside the room. And it was, Ira, I felt exactly what you say, because I was so happy in that moment, because it was a very communicative, and it was I'm an I. It's a me telling you something. I don't want you now. It was the worst moment for me, because you can imagine how I felt in that moment. She doesn't want to play with me, but it was okay. The floor timer in me took the lead of everything and say, okay, Ricardo, it's fun. Even if it's not happy moment for you, but it's so significant in that moment that you followed the lead. And I love, Ira, you brought this, because that was the key, and it couldn't be the same 10 years ago or 5 years ago, because it happened last year, and it was kind of already in that shift that we are talking about. If it happened 3 years ago, I'm sure that I left the house and say, okay, see you next time. I'm sorry, I have to go. The child doesn't want to play. I said children before. The child doesn't want to play with me again. See you next week. But last year, I said, okay, let's start much more circles. And I knock again. I say, it's me again. You want me inside or outside? And she pushed me. And it started to be a funny moment for her. And she started to triangulate with her mother, looking at the mother and looking at the door. I have the video because I had the time to put the camera. So I analyzed the video later, and I saw all this stuff. And the child started display. And that was the time that the background I was talking before, neuropsychomotor therapist enter and said, okay, let's solve some problems together with praxis. So she had to push me out of the door, but the door was closed. So she pushed me for the first time on the door, and I couldn't go outside. So she had to plan all the movements to step me back, open the door. She pulled me by the arm, and with my body, I was still on the other side of the door. It didn't work. So she had to go back again and pull me on the other direction. It was a great OT or neuropsychomotor moment, but it was a floor time moment because everything was based on her intention, on her communication, intentionality, and that was great. That was awful in the moment. I was kind of falling apart, but after when I saw the video, that was a great moment.
And think about the goal-driven type of therapist who would be like, it's time for Ricardo to be here. Go in there. We're going to start our session, instead of just going with the child's emotional intent and attuning to the child in that moment. And yeah, those two sharings that you guys just brought are awesome. Yeah, I love it.
But Daria, we have to be really careful. Ricardo, you're saying, and yeah, I would say consensually, all of us might feel similar. The child doesn't want to play with me, this is what I'm feeling. But the question is, how do you know? The child doesn't want to play with me is my idea. That may not be going on. It may be something else. And we all do that.
Yes, and the child was saying in that moment that was a positive approach. I want to play with my mother.
Yeah.
That was, or maybe not, but that was a positive idea that I could build on in that moment.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with not wanting to play with you. It's right. I want to play with my mommy now.
And one thing that we haven't mentioned, but I'll just mention because I'll throw a link in the blog post to this, to the podcasts on reflective practice, because you guys are talking about so much about how, when you reflect on the experiences, new insights come up, and that really helps frame things as well. Does anyone want to speak specifically to, or we could talk about something else? How does relational engagement, is a term that Ricardo used in the news flash. How does relational engagement result in the goals that the goal-driven therapist aimed for in the first place? So we all have the same idea of what we want, but just different ideas of that path to get there. So relational engagement ends up resulting in a lot of these goals anyway.
The journey of specific goals, like we all share, it's kind of a long one. If we can join without prejudice, we join a child or join an individual without any prejudice whatsoever, meaning no expectation, just maybe even just delight. If we accept the individual differences that we have within ourselves, but also we have within somebody. If we have it leads to a strong relationship. So a strong relationship leads to honoring individual differences. And that leads very directly to developmental capacities. So for me, when I see that little graphic of the D pointing to the R, pointing to the R, it's more like a spider web for me. It's that everything's zinging back and forth, but it begins, again, maybe because I oversimplify things, but it begins with those 3 words, join without prejudice, which I think the story is, Ira, I don't know if you've heard this, but a family who saw Stanley for the last time, they knew he was retiring and that he was quite ill, asked him if he could take the whole model and put it into 1 sentence. And the story is, no, Stanley said, I can do better than that. I can reduce it to 3 words, join without prejudice. And I thought, if that's true, it makes me cry, because in those 3 words, he got the model: to join, to hold, to keep. And so to how a relationship fosters specific, even discipline-specific goals is not a mystery to me if we join without prejudice, because it quite naturally unfolds that way. But that's a vague answer, but it's, in my mind, quite specific.
And one of Dr. Greenspan's quotes is, there's nothing better than feeling understood. And quick plug for my new book about floor time called We Chose Play, Raising an Autistic Child to Thrive and Feel Understood. And so that's what I hope, that my son feels very understood with me. I'm pretty sure he does. But that is our goal, and we're joining without prejudice.
What I was thinking about is I had a little boy who came running into the office, and he says, my mommy's always telling me to calm down. Would you calm down? Stop it. Calm down. And my daddy comes home from work and he says, would you calm down? And then he looks up at me and he says, Dr. G, what's calm mean? The parallel is, we use the word, and we've used it over and over again today, relationships, relationship, relationship. What's a relationship? And I think about it with the people who I see, and I think about, we need to have a conference and break down this word. And what we have to think about, I call them bubbles. There are 5 bubbles: attunement, synchrony, marking, contingency, co-regulation. If you have that, you have a relationship. But we have to break it down into those component parts. And when we think about treating someone, what I have to think about is, where in the relationship is the breakdown? Is it in attunement? Is it in contingency? Is it in synchrony? What do I have to work on in the relationship? But I love this big word, relationship. And I think all the time of that little boy asking what calm was. He didn't have the concept of calm. Do we have the concept of relationship?
And I'll refer people back to our presentation at the ICL conference about exactly that. I have a podcast episode about it that Ira describes all of those 5 components. So do check that out if you haven't. Carrie?
So that was, I somehow missed that, Ira, because in my floor time work, I'm having this moment because I haven't heard that word synchronized as much, but I just had a session last week with a client who's 7, who I've really been working on capacities 2 and 3 for a long time, like a year. And I don't know what came of me, but the mom actually had to step out for the end of this session. And so it was with dad, and it was just different. And I was telling mom, I was like, it was like a synchronized swimming lesson. Like, that is exactly, I was like, I don't know why, that's exactly what came out, where it was like, I did something, she did something, she did something, I did something. Like, the whole session, we were so in sync. And the biggest thing is, we sustained it. Yes. Like, the session, to me, you have those moments. There was no scattered islands on this session. It was like the whole thing. And I was just like, on such like, I just was on such a high afterwards. Like it was just such an amazing, like it was just such a win for her, for me, for the whole relationship. And I used synchronized swimming to her mom. So I just had that where I was like, see, there it is. Ira knows. That was what I was feeling, even though I didn't really have exactly the words to put it in that framework. So thank you.
When you feel it, Carrie, it's just a incredible feeling.
Yes.
To be in sync. Yeah.
Especially for, at least for me, to have a child at that capacity. Like she had to work so hard. I had to work so hard. It takes a very, very high level of attunement and a very relationship that we've worked so hard on. She's had so much trauma. And so it feels so good.
Well, you're going to love the podcast because Ira shows the pas de deux ballet scene and talks about it in that context. So I'll just put that out there. The link will be available for viewers. As we wrap up, I just want to go around. First of all, if you have any other thoughts about what we talked about, feel free to bring them up. But just maybe describe in a sentence or two about your overall, I guess, idea about being that floor time practitioner over someone who does floor time.
But I want to reduce it to one word, and that is, no, I can't do it. But if I can feel glow inside me, that word glow, if I can feel, which I think is a combination of excitement and all the feelings all together, but they're really there and they're really allowed in, then I'm a floor time therapist.
I would use a theater metaphor, and I love that, Kathleen. Thank you for that. I would leave the scene. I would jump off the stage. I would put myself aside and leave the stage to the child and to the caregiver. And I will be there, just watching them. Yeah.
I'm looking back because the article had said, and it was interesting, I 100% agree, and honoring individual differences. I was reflecting on that as someone who I think, I continue to sort of get referrals by solving problems, if you will, right? Like there is an element of family dysfunction that is happening when a child is misunderstood. And so I think it's like honoring those individual differences, but also holding a space. Like two things can be true. Like we can, as a parent, like desire change. Like we can desire progress while still holding space for the individual differences. And I think, in the process of supporting families and then sort of coming full circle on what we're talking about, I don't know if I can, as Kathy would say, like boil it down. But I will say, I say to parents, like when you feel overwhelmed that you have too many strategies, you're not sure, I always just say, go for the shared joy, and you will never be steered wrong, right? It's like when families are like, I got to get this language thing and I got to get this, I'm like, just go for the joy, just connect and just go for the joy, as like I anchor myself in that.
For me, it's something more culture based. And I think it's always been connection over compliance, because compliance tends to be a very big piece here in the Middle East. So by just explaining and reflecting always on connection and having this spark between you and the child, I think this is what I always say, or what comes like when I talk about floor time, and what's the biggest thing you want to send to people, or want to say to people, it's always going to be like connection over compliance.
I think at the end of every first session, I will say to a parent, this is a we. We are doing this together. I'm not going to do it for you. I don't expect you to do it alone. That's the way we end my every first session, honestly.
And I think I want to add the caveat that you're mostly working with young children because, of course, when you're working with adolescents or young adults, we include them as well in the idea of what they want to work on. And for the parents that are listening, when we think about, connect, have shared joy, the first thing that pops in my head is the parent who's anxious because the only way to connect is to do what the child is doing over and over again, or something that is distressing to the parent. And it's not necessarily something distressing, but that's where I think Ira's contribution of this is now the I don't want to do that too again game. So, where you can be like, my son will talk nonstop about Dogman now. Now, I personally thought Dogman was hilarious and loved the movie, after the 1800th time I've seen it. I still love it. And it's an adorable story. And the first time you see it, it's a little strange. But once you get to know it, so I'm in love with all of that stuff too. But we had to go see, well, we didn't have to. I found out that a musical was in town related to the Dogman story, Cat Kid Comic Club. And we went to see it, and it was so bad. It was brutal, like absolutely brutal. The actors were fabulous, but I'm sorry if anyone who's involved with the musical is listening, but my son loved it. So unfortunately, being the mom that I am, I found the playlist from the Dogman musical, which was out last year, which we missed, unfortunately. He would have liked that better, and I would have liked that better. And we now have to listen to this brutal song that my son wants to hear over and over and over again. So, okay, that's the shared joy. Connect with them, have fun with it. And I have to be like, do we have to hear this song again? Oh, I hate that part. And that makes it more fun for me. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the blog post at affectautism.com with links to different things we discussed. Thank you so much.
This episode of DIR Dialogues is made possible with the generous financial support of Affect Autism's members at patreon.com/affectautism and of the International Council on Development and Learning, ICDL.com. Please share this episode on social media, sign up for our newsletter, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. Find out more at affectautism.com. You've been listening to DIR Dialogues from Affect Autism. If you have an idea for a DIR dialogue topic, please shoot me an email. Thanks for listening.